Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks indeed for being here, and a welcome to those that may be listening. We're on air, and welcome them along. And a reminder for those with mobiles, if you could switch them off, it would be appreciated because it does interfere with our recording. We do record these meetings for those that want to listen to it later on as well, and we welcome those that are listening. Now, so please be seated. Thank you. So there's no apologies. Declaration of interest. Councillor Soward. 8.1. Any other for Councillor Soward? Any other declaration of interest? No. Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes held on 31st of October as a true and correct record. Deputy Mayor moved and Councillor Harris seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. and that is all councillors present. We have no deputations. We have a petition. We do have, I haven't got the list here, we do have speakers for the petition. I'm just wait 1 minute. I should get that list of. Oh, you can read. Yeah, we'll for this. Yeah, that's yeah. We'll do that. Read the rules. Thank you, gentlemen. If you read that out, that'll be good.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. No extension of time is permitted. You must speak for or against the recommendation, not ask questions of councillors or council officers, nor attempt to enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting recommendations or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you. So the first speaker we have is Rosalind Ives. Sorry? Me. Anna. No? Joe. You're the third one. Yeah. Joe. Okay. Going the other order, are we? Welcome, Joe.
Good afternoon, Mayor, councillors and Council of Launceston staff and members of the public. My name is Jo Saunders and I'm from Trevelyan, and I wish to speak in support of the petition tabled today, which was initiated by the Hands Off the Gorge community group. This petition shows that thousands of people agree, in fact 4,540, we're still more adding signatures as we speak, they agree with the following. We petition the Council in accordance with the Local Government Act 1993 to oppose the Launceston Skyway Gondola development and request that the City of Launceston reject this proposal by withholding landholder consent and rejecting any development application. The current proposal for a skyway of 24 gondola cars, 13 towers and a main station at the Cataract Gorge is unacceptable. The proposed infrastructure would dominate the landscape and skyline, completely changing the character of the gorge and forever altering the amenity for locals and visitors. That is our petition. Despite claims by the proponent that the 13 towers will be relatively hidden amongst trees, there will be loss of bushland. There will also be no hiding the cables or the 8-seater cabins. At 89 metres apart, one will pass overhead about every minute. You will see them, or you would see them from Kings Bridge, much of West Launceston and even Windmill Hill, and you will see them big time in the basin itself. The basin is a compact space, so these gondolas will be very much in the foreground. Movement attracts the eye, and geometric lines and mechanical shapes in this organic landscape would have a huge impact. The infrastructure would be unavoidable. Everywhere you look and photograph, there would be cables and cable cars. Avoiding this type of visual degradation is actually recognised in the Cataract Gorge Reserve Management Plan, which specifically encourages the removal of power lines. Launceston skyways will have a much bigger impact than power lines.
Thank you.
Please reject this proposal.
Thank you. Now, who wants to go second? Good, thank you.
My name is Rosalind Ives, and I want to speak in support of the petition tabled today. The Gorge's heritage values are recognised as being of state and national significance. It's listed on the Tasmanian Heritage Register and the Register of National Estate. An Examiner article from 1943, and I quote, "The acquisition of 770.5 acres of land adjoining the present cliff grounds at First Basin, thanks to the gift to the City Council of the purchase money, will mean that the whole of the First Basin area will be permanently protected from encroachment." End of quote. The proponents justify their intrusion by saying the gorge is not pristine. As if any place with a footpath is open slather. The proponents claim their $20 million development is to, quote, simply make it more accessible. However, at a reported cost of $20 to $25 each time, how many people would be excluded? No one will use this regularly. Council is responsible for improving access, having provided the inclinator and removed stairs in recent times. And we do understand that improvements for access will continue. This gondola proposal isn't about everyday access. It's about making money from all the visitors. The supposed economic benefits for Launceston are very dubious. Is a 25-minute ride going to encourage overnight stays? Other business owners have developed a diversity of attractions within the Tamer area that genuinely encourage longer stays, and they will wonder at the justice of allowing one business to capitalise on
Thank you.
the asset of the gorge. Please reject the Skyway
Thank you.
proposal.
Anna Povey.
My name is Anna Povey, I'm from Trevellyn, and I wish to speak in support of the petition today. The gorge is welcoming and invites social interaction, which in turn builds community. Whether it's gathering for a picnic or a barbecue, a swim at the end of a hot summer's day, or a walk and a talk with a friend, the gorge is our natural choice. For generations it has been a favourite local hangout for teenagers for freedom and adventure. We value the gorge as a space that provides equal access for all. The gorge supports our physical, mental and spiritual well-being. It is well documented that being physically active, spending time in nature and having strong social connections build good mental health. In the gorge, all three are freely available. We remind you that the Cataract Gorge Management Area Code's purpose is to protect the Cataract Gorge Reserve from incremental loss and degradation of its character and values, and ensure that development will minimise the impact on the natural, historic, cultural, heritage, landscape and scenic character and values of the Cataract Gorge Reserve. Allowing this overbearing development would be a mistake to regret immensely in future years, when it would be impossible to remove. There will always be proposals to make private profit from special public places, but it is up to the councillors to protect this special, beautiful heart of Launceston forever. Hands Off Our Gorge is committed to protecting the natural and cultural values of the gorge in perpetuity, and we ask that you commit to the same. By making it clear immediately that this Launceston Skyway proposal will not receive landholder consent, you will save the community and the proponents further wasted time and money. Please let everyone know that you too love the gorge and will ensure its protection from degradation.
Thank you. Your time is up as well. Good. Thanks very much. Somebody happy to move the motion? Councillor Finlay moves. Deputy Mayor seconded. All those in favour that we receive it, that is carried. Thank you. We move on to community reports, and fortunate to have Rod Knight here from Landcare Tas. Rod, over to the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and speak to Council today. Obviously, I haven't got a lot of time, so I'm only going to give you a bit of a snapshot. By way of background, we're a statewide organisation supporting landcare groups across the state. We've been in existence since 1994, and we're the oldest state landcare organisation in Australia. We have 250 landcare groups across the state, including around a dozen in Launceston and several dozen in the Greater Tamar region. By way of context, our 250 member groups is 90 more than we had in April 2016, and it's showing that there is a very great generosity and commitment of Tasmanians to take part in community-based initiatives around the environment and sustainability. Our groups have about 4,400 regular members and volunteers. They did 2,700 working bees and other events across the state last year, and they put in 135,000 hours of voluntary community work. And if you put that in context, it's the equivalent of about 65 full-time positions in time alone. Our role in supporting those groups, doesn't matter whether they're in Launceston or anywhere else, is very much as a service organisation. We provide them with bulk insurance so that they can work safely and they are covered in the event of mishap. We provide our groups with access to grant programs, we assist them in developing grants, and we provide them with important resources like information guides on safety, incorporation and running their groups. This year's been a very important year for us, as it was our 25th anniversary year, and we spent a good deal of the year running a program of outreach events across the Tasmanian community. And I'm very pleased to say that the event we ran in Launceston in Lilydale back on from memory was a very cold June day. Was actually attended by your Mayor Ben Zett, and I appreciate the Mayor's attendance for that. We were able this year to have a really important celebration of our community, with the Governor hosting a reception for our anniversary at Government House. We recognised 27 Tasmanians who've made significant contributions to Landcare over the years, and we were very proud to be able to have the Premier inaugurate the Tasmanian Premier's Landcare Award at that event. We held a conference the following day which had over 300 people in attendance, with 43 presentations running in 4 consecutive streams, including for the first time ever a Landcare stream dedicated solely to primary school students to help them to become more familiar with the space. And at that evening at our conference dinner, we presented the Tasmanian Landcare Awards, 9 of them. Those people become automatic finalists in the National Landcare Awards next year. And I'm very pleased to say that one of the winners of those awards was Tame RNRM, a fantastic local organisation which is strongly supported by Council, and they were a very deserving winner of that award. So whatever you're doing up here is working really well. I'm obviously from Hobart when I said up here. One of the things we've done this year is changed the way we go about supporting our groups. So Landcare groups are always looking for ways of supporting their projects. In the past, it's been a case of waiting to see what opportunities arise. What we've done now is completely turned that around and are collecting on an ongoing basis proposals for projects from our members, putting them into a project bank, and then seeking to find ways for them to support their work. We introduced that at the beginning of the year. We've to date collected 120 projects into our project bank, and we've been able to match 40 of those with forms of support from a variety of sources. It's a very interesting initiative. And I'll just finish maybe with a little comment about local government, obviously because I'm in a local government context. We've identified that local government is a very important part of the Landcare picture. From our perspective, local governments work at scales and in contact with their community, which very much aligns with what we do with Landcare Tasmania. And we have developed very strong working relationships with a number of councils across the state. We have a formal partnership agreement with Kingborough Council. Kingborough has more Landcare groups than any other municipality, and so we work with them to help ensure that those groups are supported. Clarence City Council was a major sponsor of our conference this year, and they have an incredibly good program of supporting Landcare and Coast Care groups in their communities, including a formal role in the management of council management and implementation of management plans for council reserves. How am I doing for time? Okay, I'll finish up. For us, our experience with councils is that all the councils work differently in the way they relate to their local Landcare groups, but we are very privileged to have the support of a significant number of councils across the state. Some councils pay for the membership and insurance costs of our members, which, given insurance is our second biggest expense, is important. Others work with us on a very practical level, working to help their community add to their local areas. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rod. and appreciate the work you do, and we do love our local group as well and think they do a fantastic job. So thanks for coming up and giving us that update. It's public question time. Questions from the public. Mr. Sands.
Thanks, Mayor. Ted Sands, Hobart Road, Kings Meadows. We're here again today, Mr. Mayor, Gordon Badcock and myself, regarding the issue on 403 Glenwood Road. And I must say I'm a bit appalled as to the response from council staff, which is almost a cut and paste from the comment delivered on the 31st of October, which reads, the perceived issues identified with the drainage of 403 Glenwood Road, Relvia, are primarily due to the inherent nature of the land low-lying at the lower reaches of the localised catchment area, and the land has very little grade over its extent. Well, my first question, Mayor, to the Council, through you to the General Manager, all we're seeking is some leadership to make a decision on this issue. The first question is, why does Council refuse to acknowledge that they have a moral obligation and a duty of responsibility in this matter? The second question, why has this Council refused repeatedly over a long period of time towards Mr. Badcock to remedy the problem that Mr. Badcock is having? The third question, if Mr. Badcock did not allow access across his property in the first instance, how was Council going to divert excess water which caused flooding on Glenwood Road to the river?
Thank you. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, to answer three questions, it's a simple statement. So the Council's position is clear and it's unchanged from that which we previously stated. We believe that it is both lawful and consistent with past decision making. There is a legislative framework that deals with the matters that you're raising, and we believe that our handling of the matter is in accordance with that framework.
Thank you.
Well, Mayor, I'm a bit amazed that, as I said in my third question, Council accessed Mr. Badcock's land, they accessed Barry Peters' land, they accessed David Dixon's property. Now, in the issue of fairness in this great city we have, I think it's incumbent upon Council to look at what you're doing and what you're not doing. If you didn't have access, we wouldn't be here today, if you didn't access his land some years ago. But you cannot walk away from the obligation. If you access someone's land, you have a moral obligation to go back and fix the issue. That's what we're here about.
Thank you. You've had your time, so could you please?
I'll finish up by saying, Mayor, I'll invite all the councillors, if you're so desired and able to, on your next bus trip to journey out to 403 Glenwood Road and to see this in situ, and you can understand where we're coming from.
Thank you.
Because if this drain was blocked off, it would cause all sorts of issues. So it's something I'm passionate to see a result, as is Mr. Badcock.
Yep. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions from the public?
I look forward to the response. Thank you.
No more questions. We'll move on then. So, under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items in the agenda item 8 as planning authority. So we have 8.1. We do have some speakers for 8.1. Dominic Geraghty, you're first.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Dom Geraghty, Pro Vice Chancellor, University of Tasmania. The pedestrian bridge proposal is integral to the redevelopment or development of the Inverness cultural and educational precinct, and it will be a direct pedestrian link between the Willis Street build and the Inverness site. This will allow for what we like to call, what my human movement friends call, active transport. In other words, an alternative way of crossing the river and connecting both, not only just the Willis Street site, but the city, including City Park, to the very, very vibrant, or we hope to be even more vibrant, Inverness site. This will become a valuable asset of the Launceston City Council after it's built by the university as part of the Northern Transformation Programme, and we would really like you to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Griffin.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors. Chris Griffin, CEO, Tourism Northern Tasmania. Speaking on behalf of our agency, we are in support of this development. It's a critical piece of infrastructure to connect the university community to the centre of our city, and in doing so, revitalise and energise our place as a visitor destination. I would only ask from a personal perspective that university avoids trying to build something fit for purpose. This is a structure that will outlive all of us. So great design should be at the centre of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sam Tucker.
Sam Tucker, University of Tasmania at 283 Whitehills Road. And speaking for the proposal, the bridge is the second DA connected directly to the Northern Transformation Project. If approved, it will be the first portion of works to have a sod turned, which is expected to be in March next year, with completion by the end of next year. The bridge is entirely consistent with the precinct plan that the City of Launceston have endorsed. This is a design and construct process, so as per any other project, the UTAS team will work closely with the City of Launceston town planners, so any departures from the approved application would be treated as a minor amendment or as a new application. UTAS has liaised extensively with the City of Launceston during the design phase, as this asset will ultimately be owned by the City of Launceston. As the City of Launceston are essential stakeholders, they've been requested to be on the selection panel to assist in selection of the successful tenderer. The bridge has been designed to take several key items into account, all of which are incorporated into the design, and these are connectivity into the existing northern platform. The underside of the structure is the required depth above the flooding level to the river. The land on the southern side provides appropriate clearance for cyclists and pedestrians so as not to have their journey interrupted by the bridge. And the final connection to Willis Street, which is not part of this application, needs to provide appropriate clearance above Boland Street, which the landing on the southern side of the bridge does provide for. The bridge also is a less than 1 in 33 gradient to ensure comfortable passage for people of all abilities without the need for excessive handrails and tactile indicators throughout the structure. UTAS has been in contact with representatives and believe that all issues have been resolved satisfactorily through this process. This is a key piece of infrastructure and a great asset to the city, so we look forward to seeing this journey continue. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have on that. So is there a move, Councillor Finlay, second Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Finlay?
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to speak to this item today, which presents a development application from the university, but for a significant piece of both university and community infrastructure. As it has been submitted by the university and there is an interest in the City of Launceston, important to note that it's been independently assessed. And in that assessment, the development application substantially complies where there are discretions that are outlined on page 10 and are not significant. It's interesting when we get a process that is design and construct, because when we're making that assessment, we are assessing its suitability to the scheme and within the parameters of the concept, but not that final design as usually we have at this point. But feel confident that the process does require approvals of final design, and as been stated this morning, will be useful for that to be workshopped at that point. With, for me personally, 2 points of interest in that final presentation around, there was some conversation this morning about the treatment of the railings and the permeability through the railings, where there's a hand railing at 900 and then the bike railing at 1.4. Our Seaport pedestrian bridge, I love it, it's great. However, I can see across the top of it, not everyone can. So just seeing how the design solution works for that is really important, particularly as Tourism Northern Tasmania present, as someone experiencing that, they want to be able to then, it's a really beautiful aspect of the city from that location. And the second point, the solution that's required to be continually worked up around the commingling of uses, whether it be wheelchair, bike, pedestrian, and how they meet the standards, but also how they not just meet the standards technically, but how they can actually move in those spaces in a commingled way. So looking forward to seeing those resolutions in the process. I like the comment from the public about great design. I feel confident that that will happen given where the university is with the project so far, and having with Councillor Mackenzie and formally with Councillor Soward been in that process, I feel confident about that. But as is always the way when we have assessments of this style, I couldn't help but have a light-hearted chuckle and know that we are containing this assessment to this DA, and I trust that the university are well confirmed with their second DA that will come from Willow Street, and that it all matches up beautifully with the heights and the building constructions and how that all works over there. Again, having seen early concepts, I feel confident about that, but I love that you're carrying that risk and doing that because you want to put early infrastructure into the ground for the community to see this development rise up. So on a purely planning sense, it does substantially meet all the requirements of the scheme, and where there are discretions, in my mind, they're super reasonable. Therefore, it has my support.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And like the previous speaker, I speak in support of the motion. Again, it was an interesting read when I read through it, the number of pieces of land owned by different people that this bridge is going to traverse against. So just interesting how that all interplays. But I think, as Councillor Finlay said, this has been assessed independently. I think the important difference between this bridge and the previous bridge is that we built the bridge. This one is a bridge that's being built by somebody else and being handed back to us as the owners of the property to deal with in the later stages. So I think that's an important distinction, and that's why it's important that when the design and construct work is done, that we work in conjunction with the council to make sure that we get the best outcomes. And I'm quite comfortable on being the chair of the pedestrian and bike committee. Malcolm's gone. Mr Cohen was here earlier, and I know that the bike groups have spoken to them about the egress off the northern end of the bridge, and having sort of walked over it, and I understand some of the issues where people are now going to be intermingling with pedestrians, and I guess making sure that everything meets the DDA compliance and so forth like that. So I'm pleased that there is a condition in there at 16 about access and safety to make sure when this bridge comes across to our ownership that all of those issues are dealt with before we get here, and then we don't have to do any retroactive fitting later on. I think that our officers have worked well and the consultant has worked well to get a good outcome. There was a comment about them saying, well, they haven't got a DA for the other side of the bridge in Willow Street at this stage. And I think it was quite rightly stated that this bridge has actually got more benefit than just for the University of Tasmania. It's actually a bridge that's going to be used by the community prior to the university being completed on the Willow Street site, and as I think Mr Garrity said, well after we're all gone, hopefully, so as long as it's well built, and I'll rely on Mr Tucker to make sure that happens. So anyway, I'm very happy to support this. As I say, some interesting things and discretions that are required through the process, but again, we're building a bridge, and it's actually, I think, going to be something that's really good for Launceston, regardless of the university, but it's also integral to the university, so I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I do rise to say that I will be supporting this development application, or notwithstanding that. Just want to work from the comments, first of all, from Councillor Mackenzie in regards to the amenity that this bridge will provide. I certainly do agree with that, but it's certainly not something that we have been, desperately seeking as a town. It's primarily a bridge to link the two precincts of the university together. Otherwise, it hasn't been the case that we've been crying out for this link. There's the Black Bridge, there's, of course, the Tamer Bridge. So I suppose what I'd like to see, given that is the context, is that the interconnectivity that's being talked about here is worked into future developments in the area, that this is not something that's in isolation and particularly just for the university, but is something that becomes adopted by the town, and in that way those provisions that were talked about in terms of different users being able to access that are thoroughly prosecuted as the design comes to fruition. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Sorry, we do have a speaker, Thomas Floyd.
Mayor, councillors, thank you for your time this afternoon. I'm the owner and applicant for this development at 11B to D Churchill Crescent. The proposal is alterations and additions to my home. It's also for three studios in the bottom of the property. The existing block of land is about an acre in size. It's a mature garden. It's dominated by oak trees and pine trees, about 3 to 4 stories in size, and lots of camellias around the outside. It makes it a very private and enclosed garden landscape for this development. The design intent for this development is to be very low impact and also very well designed. And these one-bedroom self-contained studios would literally sort of sink into this landscape and disappear. There's no mature landscape or trees proposed to be removed as part of this development. And I strongly hope that you can approve this development today. There has been some concerns about congestion that this development might cause on the street, but I'd just like to take the opportunity to say that all car parking and all infrastructure related to this development is contained on my site and on my title, well out of the view of anyone else. In regards to overshadowing, this development does not overshadow any of the neighbours, and in regards to privacy, it actually improves the visual relationship between us and our neighbours. With the residential alterations that we're making to the current dwelling, we're taking the living areas that are in our house now and moving them to the other side of the building, therefore removing that overlooking risk from one living area to another, which currently exists. Thank you.
Move, Councillor Finlay. Second, Councillor McKenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor McKenzie.
Look, I didn't go on the bus trip this morning, but I did walk around the area a week or so ago to sort of get myself in tune with it, and I think that all the comments made by the speaker, I think outlined the issues and the things that have been actually done to try and mitigate and make sure that development actually sits nicely on the landscape. So I take on board the comments made by Dr Atherton in regards to it, but I also note that certainly from the comments made by others that this proposal is well set away from the setbacks as well. As a consequence of that, the overshadowing issue is probably not something that we need to consider anyway.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Finlay wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we now no longer sit as a planning authority. So we go to 9.1, the Mayor's announcements. Can I say that it was a pleasure to go along to Launceston College graduation and award ceremony. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Gibson was there as well. And it was a fantastic evening, a great evening, and I think I say this quite often when we get to these type of occasions. Our future is in some great hands, some absolutely amazing young people that were involved in the graduation, and to hear them speak and to see what they've achieved and what they've done, not just for their college but also for the community, is absolutely fantastic. So congratulations to that. But also then, on last Thursday, was able to go to the Trevellyn Primary School, Be Brave and Shave, and say a few words there, but it was great to see not only from the Launceston College students doing so well, but then seeing the commitment from younger ones at Trevellyn, raising over $21,000 fantastic effort, and they've been doing this now for some 8 years, so they've raised well over $100,000. So incredible effort. So it shows you again, we've got some great young people, and our future is in some brilliant hands. So don't let anybody tell you it's not. I think we've got some great young people in our community. Then I will say that it was good on Monday night to be able to go and attend the Australian Veterans Golf Championship, the welcome party, and just say a few words and welcome. So nearly 400 people from around, or a bit over 400 people from around Australia to this beautiful city and playing golf this week. Unfortunately, they've had the wind to contend with a little bit, but I'm sure they've had a great week and looking forward to going on Friday night to a function to present some certificates and awards at that. So it's just great to have those people in the city at this time and travelling around our beautiful city. So the organisers have done a great job to get so many people in our city. And from that, it's all from me. Thank you. Councillor Sauer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to pick up the thread of your remarks on the Veterans Golf Championships, I think a number of other councillors, and they may wish to speak too, were involved in presenting certificates and bits and pieces at different, because it was a multi-course event. All I wanted to add to that, sometimes with these events like these types of championships, we can sit back and look and go, it's great for golfers to have such great courses to play on and all that. But one of the things that, in talking to the people there and also the organisers, Mr Phil Atkins in particular, it's the flow-on effect of having all those people in the city. So, as you say, Mr Mayor, over 400 people coming to Launceston. Mr Atkins indicated over 100 for Western Australia. So quite obviously, if those people are here, they're staying in hotels, they're driving cars, they're eating in restaurants, coffee shops, they're buying things from our shops. So the generation of revenue and benefit for the entire city and the region is huge, and I think that that's something that we really, really need to draw attention to. So, like you, they enjoyed being here, but also that economic benefit for everyone, I think, is something that sometimes gets understated and lost, not by the people in this room, but sometimes people in the community don't understand the benefit that it has. I know the businesses do when you talk to them and you see the visitors out enjoying our city. Thanks.
Thank you. I did remind them how beautiful this place is, and a lot of them said they are staying on, so that's even better news while they're here, especially the biggest contingent ever from WA they had, so, which is fantastic. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. 3 items from me. I want to follow your words with regard to Launceston College and say, as the Council's representative on the School Association, it's been a great pleasure this year to see the passion and commitment of all the staff, but particularly the principal, Vicky Mackerel, who in her second year has continued to take the college in leaps and bounds. This year expanding upon the role of STEAM and STEM in working with other primary schools and high schools has been particularly pleasing. It was also wonderful on the night, as you say, to see so many students receive awards, and so many of them are students who have been or are involved in our Youth Action Group. A number of the senior prize recipients being part of our current cohort, which was great. And one of them, indeed, an international student who's opted to come to Launceston College for their education. So congratulations to Vicky and the team at Launceston College. The second thing I wanted to point out, Mayor, it's also listed in your announcements, but is to recognise Carinya for their outstanding commitment to the women and young children of our community for the last 40 years. And it was just lovely that last week a number of past and present volunteers and staff and supporters were able to, at your invitation, join and celebrate that milestone. A milestone of significance in as much as many lives have been turned around through the work of Carinya, but also a milestone that indicates that there's still a great need, perhaps even a greater need in our community, to support those people who are finding themselves homeless or at risk at a young age, or with young ones, or when they find themselves pregnant. So some great passion and commitment to continue working in that space from Carinya, and I know, Mayor, they were so appreciative of that opportunity. And the third item that I wanted to mention, Mayor, was an exciting one, and that is to say that there is a wonderful partnership between the French Embassy and the University of Tasmania, which sees an incredible choreographer and dancer in Frank Micheletti spending some weeks with us, housed in the Basin Cottage, the Gorge Cottage, and working with young people to develop an innovative dance project which will be performed in a couple of weeks at the Inveresk site. This is the second co-presentation between the University of Tasmania and the French Embassy, and bodes well for us working collaboratively to showcase that as a vibrant arts, cultural, education and sporting precinct.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quickly, had the opportunity over the last few days to do a quick road trip into Orange, and I just wanted to bring back some feedback in the format of a report to say that on the way we broke up the extended journey with visits to skate parks, and I thought there's some really interesting feedback in terms of any future developments we might consider. The first being that there was not one skate park that didn't have more than 4 seats, and all the seats were sheltered. And I know that at both of ours, as a parent that frequently visits, you're often on the ground or on a rock. But for other children and things around and for families, it's really good to have that. So for future developments, really worth considering. And the shelter was really important, but also at one I saw, and I hadn't seen it anywhere else, and it was only at one, so we're not missing out, but there were actually repair stations, so for a bike repair station, a skateboard and a scooter repair station that had high tensile wire with all the tools and everything. And in terms of promoting positive culture and positive behaviours in those environments, that actually seemed really great. And that all of the facilities were co-located with other activities of other age groups. So if a parent was taking someone somewhere, there were little kids and teenagers or early adults and sort of young children as well. So for future developments around those sorts of spaces, I know that we've potentially got a long-term project with our Royal Park facility. Just good to consider all of those items. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And like Councillor Finlay, we seem to have had a few of us out of the state, and I was driving around not very far from where Councillor Finlay was, but I was there on occasion of my son's wedding in central New South Wales, but on the way back I actually traversed the east coast and went through a number of towns. And I guess just firstly to sort of big call out for what's going on in New South Wales and Queensland at the moment and how tough things are. Those that are in the fires, but there are things below the fires in drought where I was earlier in the week, last week, that are pretty tragic out there. And it just sort of, I think, cements home how great a place we live and how lucky we are in many things that we have. So just a big shout out for those people and thinking about them in those communities. But I guess that what I try to do is when I go away, I do use it as a bit of a study trip as well. And coming back down the east coast and going through Ulladulla, which is a town of about 20-odd thousand people, and going in there and looking at the city issues that are going on there and going into places where car parks are free and still seeing shops that are empty all down through regional Australia. So I don't think our issues in regards to our city are unique to us. They certainly, regional Australia is certainly suffering in that respect. And I just make the comment, the car parks were free in all these places, but there were still empty shops in the main streets and just beyond those. So I just make that and say that we need to make sure our solutions are the right solutions when we go forward with all those sorts of things. I just wanted to highlight, got back off the boat and drove straight to the Remembrance Day service, which was held at the Cenotaph, which I think the Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Councillor Walker were at as well. And I must admit, I was so impressed by Major Ritchie and his speech on Monday. And it was actually a concept about those people who'd lost their lives post the war through suicide and other post-traumatic syndrome. But I guess there was one thing that captured me at the end of it, where he was referring to a film that he watched in regards to people and saying to a person, a young soldier he'd lost 4 brothers and they sent in a mission to get this guy out, and half the team that went in to get him actually were killed on the way back, including the major. And he said to this kid, "We've saved you, but make sure you earn it." And there's a picture of him later in life coming back and he turns to his wife and, "Do you earn it?" And I guess it's really about all of us to say, did we earn the sacrifices that were made by our soldiers in war and those that have suffered post that? And I think it's actually a very salutary thing for us to all think about have we earned the right that they provided for us by saving things we're going to sacrificing their lives for it. But I thought it was a very moving ceremony and something that, the 101st day of Remembrance Day, 101st year of Remembrance Day. So it's something very special. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Like yourself, on Friday of last week, I attended the launch of the Transplant Games for 2020, which will be held here in the city of Launceston at the end of September. And at the time, some discussion was had about whether I would help organise a 3-day ride from Hobart to Launceston in April. I can confirm with you that that has now been organised on the 14th to the 19th of April. Chris Thomas, the CEO, and myself, and a number of other transplant riders and perhaps other invited guests will ride the 3 days up over Bothwell and Myena, because we want to do it easy, and at about 270 kilometres over the 3 days. So look forward to that in April and the Games in September.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Matt. I stand here just to acknowledge Movember. Some may be surprised about that, and I apologise the listeners online who can't see my magnificent, ridiculously looking Mo right now. Myself and I believe Councillor Harris are obviously involved, and I ask you all to get behind the cause of supporting Movember and tackling men's health. If you can't grow a Mo, maybe talk to someone who can grow a Mo and ask them why they're growing a Mo is probably the most important thing. So we look forward to a successful Movember.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? We'll move on then. Any questions, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor, and happy to have these two taken on notice. Just wondering if I could have an update as to the implementation of recycling for both patrons and users at our own Princess Theatre.
Is that one? That's it? Or is there two questions?
Second question, so that's question one.
I thought you were about to sit down.
The second one will have to be a notice is just an update for councillors on the audit, which I believe has commenced at the QV Mag. It's a positive news story. It would be wonderful to have an update and be able to share the positivity.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Harris?
Yes, we had a petition today presented to us, which included change.org. When I was involved in a federal petition that went to the federal parliament in 2014 for the Meter Matters campaign, there are very strict rules about what constitutes a petition and who can sign it and how it must be presented. And at that time, it did not allow electronic signatures to be collected. So I was curious as to what the council's position on it is in 2019. If the General Manager might be able to tell us, or perhaps take it on notice, but I do think it's important for us all to understand the rules. For example, the federal one would not allow an emailed signature or petition, a faxed petition to be received.
The General Manager will go tell you what our rules are. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the councillor gave me the benefit of asking the question prior to the meeting, so I can answer in the meeting. All of local government in Tasmania, so petitions are governed under Part 6 of the Local Government Act, and that does allow for paper and electronic petitions. So a signatory to a paper petition is basically a person who adds their details directly to the paper and signs. A signatory to an electronic petition, like a change.org petition, is a person who adds their details by electronic means. So there's the requirement for signatories to be electors in our municipal area only applies if a petition is seeking a public meeting or an elected poll. So it's not the case for the petition that we've received today. So there's no requirement that they have to live within the municipal area. And as was said, it's Part 6 of the Local Government Act is the specific piece of legislation. So,
thank you, General Manager. Another follow-up question?
Just a follow-up on an age limit of a person who could make an electronic signature. Is there any minimum age, or do we just accept that someone using electronic means must be of some age to do so, I guess? So,
apparently.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Walker's got a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a series of questions, and they are in regards to the Resource Management and Planning Appeal Tribunal's decision in regards to 123 Patterson Street, otherwise known as the Gorge Hotel. So if I could ask through you, Mayor, the General Manager, to begin with, do you accept the unambiguous ruling of the Appeal Tribunal? General Manager. Do you accept the unambiguous ruling of the appeals tribunal?
Take it on notice. Not appropriate.
Not appropriate. Well, then I would like to find out how much it has cost the council to pursue this matter and defend this matter through the appeals tribunal.
Take that on notice.
Certainly will. Thank you. I'd like to explore how we got this so wrong, and how councillors can have faith in the process that we go through here, and this is a very important process, so I don't wish this to be taken lightly, but how can councillors have faith in the process when we were given a recommendation that has, appeared to be incorrect?
Yep, thank you. Gentlemen, you'll answer that.
To say that it's incorrect, what you have to say is that the tribunal has taken a different view to that which the council took. That doesn't mean our view was incorrect. Our view is being put forward and it was supported by professional advice. The tribunal had simply taken a different perspective in terms of their interpretation, which for the record is quite a stringent black and white and including, a smaller element of consideration than the council had made. So I think it's not correct to say that we made a decision in error. It is correct to say that we made a decision that was legally sound and supported by professional advice, and that the Resource Management and Planning Appeals Tribunal have simply formed a different view, and that's the system that we operate in. That doesn't mean that we've made an error. It doesn't mean that our decision was faulty in any way.
Very good. Then who is ultimately responsible for the recommendation that council officers give to this chamber? Is it the relevant planning officer? Is it the Director of Planning, or is it yourself, the General Manager?
Do you want to answer?
Well,
Gentlemen,
we did go through this when we did the councillor induction and explain the way that the meeting procedure works. So obviously I have to sign that professional advice has been provided to the council, which in that case it certainly was, supported by a professionally qualified town planner with a competent report that addressed all of the issues that it needed to.
I'm certainly no planning expert, and I don't doubt that anyone around this table could consider themselves a planning expert. So of course we rely on that, those recommendations and that information coming from the council officers and via you. But, with my understanding of the current planning scheme, it was clear that we were in breach of 15.4.1, and I did make that point.
He's answered that one. I was just about to say that. That's been answered. Thank you.
Very good. Well, I suppose the point I'm getting to is the planning scheme to be interpreted as you're suggesting, that we interpreted it one way, the planning tribunal interpreted it another, or is it to be? Are we to be purely guided by the council officer's recommendation?
I think there are plenty of cases...
When it comes to the council's decisions.
Well, but there are plenty of cases that even you haven't supported when the council officers have probably supported. We've all gone against their advice at times, or if they said refusal, we've supported something. So we've always open to that, and that's part of our job.
I would add that certainly in the professional advice that you are provided, the council officers do consider the stated position of the tribunal, and clearly this is a new direction that the tribunal has taken in respect to dealing with the area in question when relative to height. So obviously our officers will take that into account moving forward. But we shouldn't forget that the councillor has passed a motion in respect of our future directions in terms of how we want to amend the scheme to better deal with proposals of this size in terms of height and bulk, and obviously that will be progressing by way of a planning scheme amendment moving forward into the future.
Certainly it would still be performance criteria that this particular development would have to meet, even if we were to adopt that. But you've also been quoted as suggesting that a change in zoning might be the best way forward for the council to assist the developer. Is that an incorrect quote from the newspaper?
General Manager?
Well, number one, I think the quote was attributed to Dean Cocker of the JOC Group, not to me, and so no, I haven't been stated as saying a different zoning is the appropriate way to progress with it.
Oh, very good. So, and I will ask some questions of the Mayor then, that it would be reported that you too have expressed some eagerness to see how we can work with the developer to facilitate an outcome. How would you intend to achieve this?
Well, I mean, I think the gentleman has just answered that by saying that we continue the process we're already on and make sure we finish it as soon as possible so that we can then consider these matters.
Okay. Have you spoken to the proponents, Mayor, since the decision?
No, I haven't.
Okay. When this development application was approved by this council, we put out a media release where you stated that we sit as a planning authority and must be guided by the planning scheme. Will you be putting out a public statement acknowledging the issues that have occurred, acknowledging the anguish that has been caused in this community by this process, and acknowledging that if we haven't erred in our decision, then at least that there's ambiguity and that we need to revisit 15.4.1 as a part of this process?
Look, I will make any statement that's necessary, but I've made those already that I felt are necessary.
So we won't be putting out any further media releases on that?
Unless we get... No, not at this stage.
Okay. And also in the media, because I can only go on media reports because we don't have a definitive statement from the council, but in the media you also quoted as saying that you're disappointed with the decision by the appeals tribunal. So are you disappointed in the tribunal's decision, or our decision, or the recommendation?
I was disappointed in the tribunal's interpretation and their decision.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think we'll just...
Yep. Well, you also expressed that, as you say, that it's disappointing, but I'm just wanting to find out if there's any other way that, as a council, we can address the anguish that this has caused in the community. I'm sure you've spoken to people who feel very strongly about this on both sides.
Both sides?
Yeah, most certainly. But it feels to me as though, as a council, we haven't addressed this issue, and until we address this issue, we can't move forward as a community.
Well, look, that's your view, and you're allowed to have that view. I would disagree with that. I think that the community is very much aware of the process. They're very much aware of, and it's not the first time the tribunal has said something different to to what council has said, but you seem to be making a story out of this one, and that's your choice.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Just... I suppose just to clarify, this question is probably to the GM. Just on a positive note, what is the process now for the Gorge Hotel to be able to reapply in its current state? Is this just a simple amendment to the scheme?
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So clearly the tribunal have made a decision in respect of their matter, which lays out, in the tribunal's view, what the scheme provisions, how they need to be interpreted to deal with that. So the only way that a development of that size will progress in Launceston, as we are well aware, is through a planning scheme amendment, which will consider the direction that the council gave us in respect of the Paul Davies work, which outlines a framework which provides a series of threshold heights and in respect of matters that need to be considered. And so clearly that scheme amendment needs to be brought forward and before, I guess, higher than average buildings will be able to be, assessed properly through the scheme.
So obviously they would seek an amendment, and then supposedly that amendment gets approved, then put the DA in that we've previously approved.
Again, from my understanding, it's likely that proponents will await us to move forward with our Paul Davies related work, and we will initiate the amendment as part of the new planning scheme work that we're completing.
And possible timeframes on adopting the Paul Davies? I know that's a $1 million question.
Yeah, well, the planning scheme's already been lodged with the Tasmanian Planning Commission, so we would hope to bring forward the amendment around the Davies work before the end of the year, but it may well be early in the new year. We really just need to assess and see where that's at and what's possible. So.
And can you just remind me, what was the result of the vote for the original Gorge Hotel? Was it 10-2 or 11-1? 10-1. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from councillors? No, we'll move on to item number 12.1, the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Just to note that, again, given we had the petition today regarding the gorge, that there was a revised registration of the Gorge Reserve put forward by the Tasmanian Heritage Council, and it's just noted there that we've given time for the council to respond to that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
No, nothing further.
Any other speakers? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.1, the workshop report. Moved, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris seconded. Deputy Mayor, any comments? Speak.
I'll just take the opportunity to say that there's so many exciting things happening in the organisation, and two on that day that I think are worthy of attention. The City Deal updates, obviously continually being provided with updates, and on that occasion hearing of the tremendous success of having young people from the northern suburbs come into council and work with council staff and the Mayor to have their mind opened to the opportunities and possibilities that are alive and well in local government was fabulous to hear about, and to hear the feedback from schools with regard to the positive role modelling and I guess the care and attention that is being given to young people. One of the very small things, but nonetheless important things happening as part of the City Deal. And also to cast more excitement on the work undertaken with regard to the Launceston brand development. There's been a plethora of work undertaken by our community development team, community development, tourism and events team in that space, and I think that is going to be another transformational thing that is going to continue to impact Launceston, so that we're perhaps not the 11th most talked about city in the world, but perhaps, as we know, number one. So we look forward to that work coming to fruition, continuing to gain momentum with the plethora of other things that are happening in the space. But it's good work and deserves to be fully realised.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 15.1, delegation from council. Moved Councillor Mackenzie. Amendment 1, second to Councillor Soward. So you're doing the amended one? You want to?
Yeah, just moving the amended one, which really I think just notes that there is a change in the term for the leader. I think there's parking coordinator, and there's
a correction. So that's it. That's the motion you're moving.
Yeah, that's the motion circulated. So I'm just really noting that motion.
Yeah. And you're moving it? You want to speak to it?
No, I think it's just all it's doing is aligning the delegations that are currently in place with the new titles that people have.
Thank you. Councillor Soward?
Just to say, yeah, it's really important.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors here that are present. It is carried. We go to 15.2 again, delegation. Councillor moved, Councillor Soward. Seconded, Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward.
Obviously, there's a corrected version that's been disseminated to councillors. But once again, as it says, it's going to lose me because I just hit the back button on my iPad, but it's now back. It's now back. Due to obviously a restructure, it's just really, really important that we make these corrections and make sure that people have the delegations they need to have and everything's accurate and transparent.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to item 15.3, special event sponsorship, BMX, and we have a speaker, Martin Shaw. Welcome, Martin, and you were here before when the rules were read out, so I think you're aware of.
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for considering our application our proposal for some support for the BMX Australia National Championships next year. The BMX event is the largest BMX event in Australia. It's our showpiece event we're expecting about 1,500 entries for the event, ranging from riders 5 years of age to 65 years of age, and including the very cream of BMX riders in Australia. So current and future Olympians and those who are looking for a berth at the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo will be there. We'll also incorporate the Oceania Championships, so we'll be bringing some riders from New Zealand over for a little bit of trans-Tasman rivalry as well. So as I say, there's about 1,500 entries we're expecting for it. Along with that comes mums, dads, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives. So we're certainly expecting over 3,000 people to come into Launceston for this event. They will come for usually between 5 and 7 days. Some of them come for a little bit longer, and we will be doing our very best to be filling up your hotels, filling up your restaurants, and giving the riders a bit of an opportunity to also take in some of the wonderful tourism opportunities that are available here in northern Tasmania. So the economic benefit to the local community is in the $3 to $4 million range, and that's been done not only on our estimates but also by been corroborated by the states that have held the last two national championships. So we feel that there's a really, really strong economic benefit to the local community for hosting this event. There's also in itself a great, wonderful community event that brings thousands of people in and gives us an opportunity to show off Launceston and what it has to offer, and we look forward to working with the council and a fantastic club in the Launceston BMX Club to run a fantastic event. The club there is very keen, so thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, your time is up. Move Councillor Soward, second Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, it's not too often that we have a major. It's not too often we have a major event that comes here of this sort of nature, and as the Speaker said, age 5 upwards to over 50. I mean, that's a pretty special, inclusive, encompassing event. And again, the fact that there would be 3,750 potential attendees, with 3,375 being from interstate, is enormous. And again, I'm always happy to be corrected from people with better memories than mine, but there's not too many things that I can remember that have been in this city that have brought that many people for such a thing. I think it's an amazing opportunity. And the Speaker, said an economic benefit of between $3 and $4 million, and as Councillor Stodgesek and I were talking at the time, which was a bit naughty, great return on investment, great return on investment for a $30,000 investment from this council, as well as obviously the other sponsors the organisers have. Mr Mayor, it's easy to say $3 to $4 million, it's just a number really, but when you start thinking about what that means for our community, several days, as the Speaker said, of accommodation, actually living and relocating in a different part of the country, where you'd be staying in accommodation, eating meals, travelling around perhaps in between races, it's just amazing. And then obviously for some of those people, maybe their first visit here, and they may use that as come here and think, wow, we all know what a wonderful place we have, and hopefully they return and tell other people about it. One thing I wanted to add, Mr Mayor, obviously very, very strongly in support of this, and I did highlight some experiences from another event earlier this week. One thing which I think cannot be understated, I'm very, very happy as a councillor to be criticised for things that we don't do. It's always happy to wear that. If we don't do something, we don't do it well. But when we support something like this, people will say, oh, $30,000, that's a lot of money. And it is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for each of us individually. But when you look at this contribution that this city is making, that will generate between $3 and $4 million, $3 to $4 million, we hear how tough traders are doing it. We hear how things are battling out there. Well, wow, what a great shot in the arm. And again, as I said, when we talk about inclusive events, 5-year-olds up to over 50, male and female. Terrific. Well done to you and your team, and I look forward to the event being in our city. Strong support from me, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Soward. Yes, you were naughty talking while that was going on. But you sit there and look at the ones that we've done, the golf championships, the fly fishing, the karate, they're all adding to the fabric of this town. And I think that the event in itself, and it may last for a few days, and people might come and people might go, and as was said, they'll stay and they'll go around the city and they'll probably go further than Launceston. And just reflecting on the comments that was made by Councillor Soward with regard to the golf, I went out and did some presentations and having a chat to people, and they were here for weeks driving around. They brought their mobile phones, they probably brought them too, their mobile homes with them, and they were taking off for a venture around here. But I think the legacy of these things actually lasts longer than just the event. If we do them well, and I have to say I'm pretty proud of the way Launceston actually does stuff. When we have an event, I never hear anything but praise for the people who organise and run the events here. And what they do is they go home and tell people what a great experience they had in Launceston and surrounds. And I don't know whether there's any synergy, there probably isn't, but I think we were named 11th most important city in the world somewhere in some escape magazine the other day, I think somewhere. This was Launceston, not Tasmania, Launceston. And events like this, people come here to do things well, and again, it's fantastic. It's a lead into the Olympic Games because, again, it'll get more publicity as a result of that because BMX is actually, we do pretty well on the world scene in regards to that, and we've always competing, and it's the one time I actually sit down. I love watching it on the Olympic Games. Absolutely nuts. But I think it's really exciting, and I think this is just another event. And the fact that we can support it, now there was something reported in the Examiner about that we were short of money. The reality of it is we're not, as we see when we're doing it. We're actually saying we've actually got a budget, another budgeted area, which we haven't utilised this year, and all we're doing is transferring the money over so that we can actually afford the additional funds that are required, and we still have some leftover funds yet. So we're still within our budget requirements in regards to sponsorship, so I'm very comfortable with that. And I just wish the organisers well and hope that everybody around the table sees fit to support it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, Councillor.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you to those that have spoken before me, particularly noting the budget notation there. I want to reference as well that the assessment committee is made up of external members, including the Launceston Chamber of Commerce, who obviously see BMX as a way of making this one of the great regional cities of the world, together with City Prom and Tourism Northern Tasmania, who each scored this particular assessment. Echo the words that Councillor Soward and Councillor Mackenzie have said before me, and also, I guess, reference the item that I mentioned before with regard to our tourism branding. I'm not sure how task allocations occur or how one part of a department talks to another, but here is an incredible example with an event such as this to be able to test out and try some of the money that we've spent on consultancies with regard to our tourism and branding. Here is an opportunity to put it into practice, to work with the event organisers, to work with the organisations that are so keen to have us supporting the event, and to further enhance the branding of the event and kick some of our own goals in terms of what we're trying to do as we market our city. So I wish the organisers and our department, who are going to be working so strongly with you to make this a win, all the very best.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Soward, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 18.1, Invermay Traffic Master Plan. Councillor Cox is moving it, or no?
No.
Oh.
No, Mayor, it's an amendment motion. It's not an amendment. It's a change.
It's a different motion, a new motion.
A new motion. So, Mayor, I would like to leave it exactly as it is, with the exception of adding in defer Project 7, Invermay Road, Lindsay Street, new traffic lights including changes to Esplanade Boland Street lights until after the adoption of the Road Launceston Transport Division and receipt of the traffic management, the traffic impact assessment of the University of Tasmania relocation.
It's been seconded by Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
Look, I will, Mayor. I struggle with this one. I know a few other councillors have struggled as well, and I thank officers for their assistance with this.
and the Mayor may have struggled with some of it too. It was a very difficult one because it got to the point where you either support the whole thing or you don't. And if you don't support the whole thing, then it all goes pear-shaped. So I would like to put this motion forward, or this change forward. And the reason I'm doing it, I am totally, completely opposed to the suggestion that we remove the roundabout at Inveresk and put in traffic lights. And that's really the main concern that I've had with this. I'm a great believer in evidence-based information. So I thought our closest neighbours are Victoria. They do pretty good stuff with road safety. So I went to the Towards Zero Victorian Government au.safe roads. And we take a lot of stuff off them. We take a massive amount of, in fact, we copy them in everything we do. And if I'm allowed to quote a couple of things. In Victoria, 40% of crashes result in people being seriously injured or killed happen at intersections. How do roundabouts make intersections safer? Roundabouts help to make intersections safer by reducing vehicle speeds at intersections, make it easier to choose a safe gap in traffic. In the event of a crash, roundabouts reduce the severity of the impact by changing the angles and speed. Roundabouts are one of the safest types of intersections and reduce the risk of being severely injured by up to 90%. I've been doing this stuff for about 20 odd years and I simply cannot change what I've had drummed into me by people from as far away as Sweden to right around the world. So very quickly, are roundabouts safer than traffic lights? Yes, roundabouts are safer than traffic lights, mostly because they reduce the risk of high speed crashes. And isn't it interesting, Mr Mayor, that in Victoria, there are new roundabouts being built in regional Victoria as part of Towards Zero. And they are building 11 roundabouts in regional Victoria to be completed in the next 12 months or so. So with that in mind, I really struggled to think, how can we get rid of the roundabouts? Or how can I support this while this is still part of it? And I can't. So for that reason, I've moved this motion. That takes that out of it. And I also am concerned that we are now reliant on what will happen with state growth, the changing of the traffic lights. They don't always move the speed of light. So until that is implemented, I really don't see the point in us moving forward and doing other stuff until we've got something to work with. So on that basis, I would be appreciative if members would support.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'm delighted to support Councillor Cox's amendment because, again, and I know he's very humble, but around this table, 20 years experience and knowing this stuff as he's done there with producing that data, I think there's some very, very good science behind it. So makes a lot of sense. A lot of what he says makes sense most of the time. No, in all seriousness, very, very sensible from Councillor Cox, and I'm delighted to support it.
Councillor McKenzie. Thank you. Director Everhart, still Director.
So undertaking a trial on the other end of the bridge is simple because we've got right turn arrows, so simply taking the arrow away, which then will give more time to the through traffic. On the other side of the bridge, we've got where the esplanade is. It's more difficult to do a trial because we would still like to allow the left turn in from the esplanade, but because we've got traffic signals there, we can't allow a left turn filtering while we've got signals controlling the intersection. So unfortunately, we can't really trial that intersection without taking out the signals altogether.
Go for it. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Great to see Jim, Councillor Cox, with that about the roundabouts in Victoria. I've been one for roundabouts. I've been to Cairns many times, and the roundabouts actually work magnificent. And we still could do that at Foster Street and Lindsay Street. We probably need to buy the servo and a few houses. But if we're going to do this, I think don't have traffic lights, let's have roundabouts. Let's do it right at the start. And this could fix all the traffic at Invermont. 66,000 cars go through Cairns intersections, roundabouts, and there's no traffic jams. We've got 35,000 vehicles a day here. Up there, they've got 66,000, and there's no traffic jams. So I think roundabouts are the answer for safety and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, question, sorry, from Councillor Harris.
Yes, my question's actually perhaps to Councillor Cox or perhaps the officers, is if you are deferring item 7, which is in the current short-term plan, is it then to be moved into the medium term of 3 to 5 or the long term of +6, or in fact removed altogether, and we will not look at this until such time as we get the plan for the university and other master plans that we're looking for?
My interpretation would be that we would wait till we've got the greater Launceston transport vision, the traffic impact assessment from the University of Tasmania Development, then we'd come back to council with an assessment against those documents.
Question?
Follow-up is, we've got a timeline on that?
I can't advise on the DA for the university, but the greater Launceston transport vision will be coming to council in the next few months.
After Christmas, probably. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. When Councillor Cox opened, I think it's worth complementing his approach to this with either saying yes to it all or no to it all and finding a compromise in the middle, because as we have our pre-council discussions and workshops and other offline conversations, this one has been a tricky one, and it's been a tricky one for Councillor Cox to get his head around. So I think this approach is actually a good one. Well done. Personally, I support 7, and although roundabouts work in many circumstances, my experience of this roundabout is that it's already failing with the current level of traffic. So I'm happy that the recommendation is to defer it. I'm happy that it gets informed by the other documents. I feel confident that it will potentially progress. Therefore, I'm happy to support the item before us this afternoon. With particular note for me, 2.14, where it talks about synchronising traffic lights, 5 with the trial of the right-hand turns, and 6, our plan around traffic signals. I think they're all really important. I acknowledge the way it's been broken down into short, medium and long-term projects, and thank the officers for the excruciating amount of work, feedback and consideration of this over a period of time to get it to the table today.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and I'd rise to back up those comments from Councillor Finlay that indeed it has been an excruciating amount of work, and I'm sure everyone around the table appreciates the level of detail and the amount of, deep and involved work that goes into that. I will support Councillor Cox's amended suggestion because I do see that things will change in that area as developments occur, and making a decision at this time does not seem to be, perhaps the most appropriate thing. And I do accept, apart from Councillor Cox's experience, I accept his arguments in regards to the effectiveness of roundabouts. I would like to see that this roundabout could be looked at and improved in some ways, whether it's creating a little bit more of a slowing down of traffic, especially north-south traffic, which seems to be the issue, whether it can be slightly offset so that it does help to slow traffic through there. I'm sure these are things that, occur to people in the planning department, but I'd certainly be happy to be informed of any of those sort of explorations. And as far as the medium and long-term planning goes for the area, I look forward to further iterations, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Mayor. Traffic. I suppose what I don't know is what might or mightn't happen. I think that's what all of us. What I do know, though, in this particular instance is there are many, many ideas and there are many experts that we all quite often meet every day. But we're here to make decisions that hopefully will create positive change to our community. And I believe Councillor Cox has presented a common sense approach that we can all work towards making that positive change to our community. So I do support his motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris?
Yes, I also will, having considered the arguments being presented by the other aldermen today, support Councillor Cox's suggestion to defer on item 7. I believe that traffic lights there probably are the long-term solution for it. However, and having spent in fact more than an hour one AFL football game trying to get out of the car park, because there was no traffic light and there was continuous traffic from the north, giving way to a right on a roundabout is incredibly difficult. So it isn't the best solution. However, I am convinced that we will look at it at a better time. So I'll support it in this manner. My only disappointment is perhaps that in the long term we don't seem to have a eastern bypass as part of this, or even another bridge across the Tamar, but I'll look forward to those in the future anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. I rise to say I'm a big fan of Councillor Cox as well. But this particular matter is a master plan, and so it's important, I think, that Councillor Cox doesn't take all the credit for all of the items that are listed as part of the master plan. It has been a process of education and information, and I think it would be fair to say that we have perhaps gone a little slower than we would have appreciated, but I do think that the outcome in this instance is a sound outcome, whereby all of the parts fit together to provide what we trust is a sound solution, and with the additional step that's going to be taken with regard to the work undertaken as is included in item 7, will collaboratively join force to provide some solutions at this time into the future. It's going to be something that will continue to be reviewed and need to have solutions provided as we continue to grow, as we continue to change. That is development, but referencing all of the elements that make up the master plan, and as has been highlighted a number of times, item number 7 as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Any other speakers? Deputy, if you'd have the chair. Well, I do prefer roundabouts generally, just to get to the point that's on, generally to traffic lights. However, I'm not convinced at that position that roundabout would be better than traffic lights, but I'm happy for the motion that you have made. My problem with all of this has been, and right from the beginning, as General Manager and others would know here, is probably that extra set of lights happening in between McDonald's down to the bridge. I'm not convinced that is the right answer yet, to have that extra set of lights in there to have further bottlenecks of traffic, unless we do know that the improved synchronisation of traffic lights is happening, and I would rather see that in place, we trial it, see how it works before I can support that. So that's where I sit at the moment. I'm finding it very hard to support another set of traffic lights. And I agree with point 9, I think it is, with the Esplanade and coming out no right-hand turn. But I would like to see no traffic lights there at all. Then I could probably support the one up further. Have absolutely no traffic lights at that end. Have an overpass for people to walk across, for pedestrians to walk across. And I'm sure that would make a complete difference to the traffic flow. That those lights, if we haven't got a right-hand turn, are not really needed, in my opinion, except for people to walk across the road. Now, we can do that differently, a better way, and I would love to see part of that. And I don't think we've gone far enough with that intercept that bridge to do it properly. Because if we have an overpass or somehow that people get underpass, whatever people want to get across the road, it would make such a difference to safety for people, but also for the traffic. It'll continue to move and it'll be one less light out of the system. I think we've got enough lights in there, and I know I go through that way. I try to avoid the peak times. That's part of me. I always avoid peak times wherever I can. But even in non-peak times, when I'm driving, I stop at nearly every one of those lights because they're not synchronised, and that is part of the problem. So I want to see this, and I see York Street is supposed to be synchronised and still not synchronised, and it's just the issue with traffic lights is the main issue that we seem to have in this city, and if we can get that synchronising right and as early and soon as possible, I'll be more than happy to then trial and support an extra one, but I am really struggling to support the extra lights along at Glencoe Street at the moment. So that's where I sit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Back to you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox.
Look, I will, Mayor, and thank you to everyone around the table for your comments and thoughts. Mayor, we could fix your problem. We could put a roundabout up there too. That's not part of this plan. I just saw Director Eberhard cringe. Can I take the opportunity to thank him for his patience and tolerance? I've been run around too on this one. It's not just about the roundabouts. It's my real concern with this is that as we move forward and as we've done in the past, we make a decision and we implement something, and maybe we haven't always taken the time that we should have to get something right. And I'm concerned that into the future, we start messing around with Invermay Road, and if we don't get the Godric Street side right, all we're going to do is transfer the problem that we've got in Godric Street back onto Invermay Road. So we're going to have two lots of problems instead of the current one and a bit. But time will tell. Thank you for allowing the time to go forward and give Director Eberhard a little bit more work and some of his associates. But I do think that anything that we rush into at this stage would be a mistake. We don't know the outcome. State growth, I think, they'll probably castigate me for this. I think it's been around 20 years that we've been waiting for our traffic lights to be synchronised. Hobart's were done. I know the technology is there. As yet it's not implemented. I have a strange thought that maybe once they do the Godric Street one into Charles Street, that's then going to push it up into Wellington Street, and maybe the priorities will change and they'll start doing Wellington Street instead of somewhere else. So for all those reasons, let's wait and see what happens. Let's see where it goes, and when we've got something concrete to work with, it's called a foundation, then we can go forward.
Thank you. Councillor Cox. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? I'll vote. That's carried. Thank you. We'll move on to 19.1, the annual financial statements. Move. Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Bowden. Wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I think it does deserve speaking to, and I think if we look there, it's our annual financial statements, which are a fairly important part of our business. And I think it's probably important almost to start at the bottom on page, whatever it is, page 135, which really talks about the overall summary of the Council's financial position, which says the Council's balance sheet continues to be in accordance with the current and long-term budgets. Loan balances are in accordance with the budget. Cash balance remain in accordance with long-term strategy, etc., etc. So basically, everything's basically in line with everything. I think it's important to note that we've actually ended up in a profit situation, which we seem every year to get a prepayment paid by the state government, which brings us from a deficit into a surplus, which usually robs the next year. And from the point of view of us having a deficit it'll just make a bigger deficit in the current year, which again, as stated in there, will be used to fund this year's profit, will be used to fund next year's budgeted surplus. So I think it's the business has been run well. We certainly are working within the budgets that we've set. Our balance sheet is strong. Our debt is little, and in respect of the fact that we've got a $9 million debt, I think is the only debt which was borrowed for the car park, for which we have an interest-free loan for 5 years. So we're not due to pay that back till, I think, 2022. And so effectively we have zero debt, and we have funds in our accounts, which when that debt is required to be repaid, we'll be able to do that, but earn the interest on it in the meantime. So I think that the business is in good nick as far as its financial processes going forward. I do note comments made by the General Manager in our long-term planning, which says there are going to be some pressures in the medium term, and hopefully with what we're doing, strengthening our balance sheet as we go through, will just make it a lot easier, and I guess the strategies that we put in place in due course will actually sort of mitigate those, and that can come through growth in rates and a number of other things over time. So if we do a good job in managing our city well, then hopefully it will look after itself. But I think the fact that we do have a long-term, a medium and long-term vision in regards to where the city goes in its financial aspects, I think we've got a really good roadmap to work from. So I just commend the report to you.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Yeah, Councillor Mackenzie summed it up very, very well. Just a couple of things I wanted to add. Sometimes, like many of us, we see things about what our financial position is as a council that bears absolutely no resemblance to the real audited documentation that's here in front of us today. And as it says on page 132, under the statutory requirement, Council is required to have its financial statements complete and forward to the Auditor-General. Well, that's obviously happened, Mr Mayor. They were signed by the General Manager back on the 30th of June, and the audit certificate was signed by the Auditor-General on the 27th of September, the day before the Tigers won the grand final, and the opinion was issued without qualification. Without qualification. Always good to know that people are listening, that's good. Jokes aside, it's really, really important to note on page 135 that the Council's balance sheet continues to be in a very sound position. Councillor Mackenzie touched on the fact that what we're doing is we're actually doing what we said we'd do. We're in accordance with current and long-term budgets. And again, looking at the information in front of us, Mr Mayor, we're in a sound financial position. And I think in challenging times that we live, not just in Launceston obviously, but in Tasmania and Australia and perhaps the world, to be in a sound position is a result of prudent financial management and hard work of staff. And to that end, Mr Mayor, I think it's really, really important to acknowledge, as I say many times in here, the budget process is one. It's not just done at the end of the financial year, it's a year-long process. It involves a lot of time, a lot of diligence, and I commend all of those who have assisted in putting us in this position that we're in.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? It is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, financial report. Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded, Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, and again, this is the first quarter of the year, and again, like a lot of these things, it's an early part of the year, so it's very hard to determine exact trends in regards to sort of what the financial end result would look like. Looking at it on the surface of it, we've actually made a loss of $588,000 versus a budget of $814,000, which is a $1.4 difference. But that variance can be explained by the comment made in the previous one where we received a state grant in advance of about $2.2 million, and that now reversed itself in this quarter. So as a consequence of that, when you take that out, we're actually ahead of budget in regards to everything else, whilst there are some ups and downs in there which we manage. And I guess a significant one is our fees and charges, which I guess is promoting the fact that we are running some businesses at the moment which are actually being well utilised, like our planning services and things like that, which is increasing the revenue, which hopefully then ends up on our rate basis, on the basis that our rates will go up on the basis of the developments that have taken place on it. I guess the other important aspect, which I did ask the General Manager at our Audit Committee last week or the week before, in regards to the employee benefits, were $620,000 in front. I guess that is largely as a result of the OAP process and positions not being filled at the time. And I did ask him on the basis that we've seen a number of redundancies that have been flowing through in the last few weeks as to the impact of that. And effectively, if there are any additional redundancies over and above what were budgeted for, they are well and truly catered for by the savings that we're making in our current employment structure. So I'm thinking at this stage it's a quarter of the way through the year, and the trends on a number of these things are probably still playing their way out. But I think that, again, I'm seeing a number of positive lines in there in regards to the way that we're dealing with things. The materials and services, $150,000 is actually probably taken up in consultancies where we've got short-term shortages in staff. We've actually brought people in from outside, so that sort of, if you like, somewhat mitigates against the surplus that we've got there. And again, we sit there and we look at depreciation as an expense. It just means we've got more assets, which means we're writing them off. So whilst it is a negative, it's actually not a really negative aspect on the basis that we still have the assets there and our asset base is growing on which to depreciate against. So again, I take this as an interim report, and we've worked at the audit committee to try and work out what are permanent differences and what are timing differences. And again, some of those are hard to tell in the first quarter, but by the time we get to the December report, we'll start to sort of firm up where we've got some permanent benefits and some permanent changes in the budget, and therefore be able to get a much better sense of where we're going in line with the budget that we put forward and approved some months ago.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Mackenzie wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.3, the delegation from council to council officers. Moved Councillor Finlay, seconded Councillor Cox. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Cox? Any councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 20.1, the council schedule for next year. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy? Councillor Harris? Anyone wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. I think we're therefore have a motion that we are going to closed council. Moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Soward. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. I think Councillor Dakin supported it. Yeah.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
So we're back in open council. Can I have a motion that we endorse the decisions taken, and the motion is there in our report. Councillor Sauer moved, seconded Councillor McKenzie. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried, which is all council. Close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m.